My name is Delilah Boone. I'm 37 years old, and at 4:52 on a humid Saturday afternoon, while buttercream frosting turned sweet in the heat and the sharp smell of hay and horse sweat drifted in from the barn, my mother finally said the thing this family had been rehearsing around me for years. My niece's birthday party was spread under a white tent beside the indoor arena, children shrieking near the pony ring, paper plates bending under cake, boarders and cousins pretending this was just another Boone Farm gathering instead of a public stripping down dressed as celebration. I was still wearing my work jeans and a clean blue button-down I had changed into after checking 2 boarding invoices, 1 breeding deposit, and a feed delivery confirmation because farms, unlike families, do not stop needing numbers just because someone ties pink ribbons to a fence post. Then Renee Boone lifted the farmhouse keys in front of relatives, boarders, and 1 local trainer, dropped them into Cassidy's hand and said, "You're good enough to muck stalls, Delilah, not to own anything here." She said it lightly, almost like a joke, which made it worse. Wade laughed into his drink. Cassidy smiled that polished little smile she always wore when the room had already agreed to admire her. 1 boarder looked down at her lemonade. Another pretended to adjust her daughter's hat. That line should have humiliated me into silence. Instead, it clarified everything. I did not remind my mother who handled the feed accounts, the vet schedules, the breeding paperwork, the winter repair bills, the tax notices, and the payroll gaps. I did not ask Cassidy whether she knew what the lender expected by October, what the liability rider required, or whose name still sat on the land note, the insurance protection, and the contracts that kept the breeding side alive. I just stood there with sugar, dust, and hot August air thick in the back of my throat and understood, all at once, that none of this was sudden. Cassidy got displayed, I got deployed. Cassidy got the story, I got the structure. In this family, I was good enough to save the farm, just never good enough to be publicly named its future. So I set my untouched cake plate on the gift table, picked up my truck keys, and left them their little coronation before they could ask me to smile for a photo. 5 days later, the agricultural lender and the insurance broker called because Cassidy's Newera posts had reached the people who actually read files, and the land note, the insurance rider, and the breeding contract still ended in my name. Before I tell you what froze first and why my mother suddenly needed me not to ruin this for the kids, tell me what time it is where you are and where you're watching from. I always want to know how far a story like this travels before it lands on someone who already knows what it feels like to keep the farm alive and still be told you were only ever fit to clean up after it. Here's what they didn't understand when my mother lifted those farmhouse keys under a party tent and dropped them into Cassidy's hand, like 7 years of my labor could be turned into a little family blessing with enough frosting and children around it. They thought they were doing what they had always done. Give the visible daughter the symbol, push the useful daughter back into function, and trust that I would keep the machinery underneath it all moving, because I always had. What they were actually doing was announcing a transfer on top of a farm structure they did not control. I manage equine operations and farm books, which means I do not hear the phrase "new era" the way my mother does. I hear operating renewals, liability exposure, feed terms, breeding deposits, note restructuring, insurance continuity, and the exact point where family sentiment starts pretending it can outrun signatures. 7 years earlier, when Boone Farm should have been lost for good, I did the work nobody in my family wanted attached to their names. I stopped the place from defaulting when the seller-financed land note started slipping. I paid off emergency feed liens before our suppliers cut us off in the middle of foaling season. I fought through a claims dispute that nearly cost us the farm liability rider, then rebuilt the policy chain until the broker would speak to us like adults again. I kept the breeding side alive with contracts that actually meant something, cash flow that actually balanced, and records that could survive a bad month without collapsing into wishful thinking. None of that photographed well. Cassidy still got the glossy side of the story. Show ring ribbons, sunset photos with yearlings, little captions about legacy and heart and keeping the Boone name strong. I got the invoices, the haul-out calls, the hay shortages, the winter pipe repairs, the farrier schedule, the tax notices, and the private humiliation of being treated like hired labor inside a place that would have been sold in pieces without me. By the next morning after the birthday party, I was at my kitchen table with cold coffee beside my laptop, pulling the full structure into one clean folder, because I already knew Saturday had not ended at humiliation. It had moved into exposure. The land note documents first, with my LLC still sitting there in the live seller finance chain. Then the farm liability rider. Every endorsement still resolving through me as the named insured contact. Then the breeding contracts, the boarding agreements, the operating cash notes, and the payment records from the years my mother now likes to call those hard stretches, as if the farm had not nearly been swallowed by its own mythology 3 separate times. After that, I opened Renee's archived texts, which looked almost indecent once I stripped the mother tone off them. Save the farm quietly. Do not scare Wade with numbers. Your sister is what clients connect to. After everything we sacrificed, do not punish us with paperwork. There it was again. The whole Boone doctrine in 4 lines. Cassidy got connection. I got consequence. She got the porch. I got the chain beneath the porch. At 9:18 Monday morning, I made the first professional move. I did not call my mother and ask whether she had already started telling boarders, local trainers, and half of Fayette County that Cassidy was taking over in any real legal sense. I did not send Cassidy a wounded sister message about gratitude or the difference between holding keys and holding risk. I confirmed the note status, checked the insurance endorsements, reviewed the breeding contract signature lines, and emailed the agricultural lender instructing them to route any inquiry tied to restructuring, operator transfer, or ownership language through me in writing. Then I sent a second note to the broker and farm council, clarifying that no transfer of property control, insured operations authority, or breeding side contract ownership had been executed, and that any public representation suggesting otherwise should be treated as premature. No drama, no threat, just the end of assumption. The consequences arrived faster than I expected. By Monday afternoon, the lender wanted to know whether the fall operating renewal should be treated as unchanged or in transition because new owner language had already surfaced around the property. By Tuesday morning, the insurance broker was asking why Cassidy was posting Boone Farm as her next chapter if the liability rider and seasonal endorsement still sat under my active authority. Then Tuesday night, Cassidy posted a carousel of herself leaning on the pasture fence at golden hour, with a caption about carrying the farm forward. That was the first clue this was already bigger than one ugly line under a party tent, or one set of keys dropped for effect. My mother had already sold a legal handoff story to the outside world on top of a land note, an insurance chain, and contract income she assumed I would never force into daylight. Funny how often families call a woman supportive when what they really mean is too disciplined to interrupt the lie. And if they had already started telling clients she was in charge, the next question was obvious. What happens when the people who actually hold the farm together stop pretending the fantasy counts as paperwork? The first panic call came 5 days after the birthday party at 8:41 Wednesday morning, while I was in my office above the feed room reconciling border invoices against a farrier schedule that had already gone sideways because one gelding had thrown a shoe and another mare needed sedation before anyone touched her feet. I had one screen on receivables, one on fall breeding deposits, and one on the Boone Farm file I had been very carefully refusing to call a crisis until somebody outside the family used language serious enough to earn it. The call came from the agricultural lender, and the second the man on the line asked me to verify the active signer on the land note restructure, I knew Cassidy's little Newera performance had already hit the wrong desk. "Ms. Boone," he said, measured in the way bankers get when they are already building a record, "we need clarification on operational control. We are seeing public ownership language around the property, but the active land note, fall renewal discussions, and supporting financial chains still resolved to your LLC." There it was. Not because my mother had found a conscience. Not because anybody under that party tent had gone home bothered by the fact that the daughter who kept the farm alive had just been told she was good enough to muck stalls, but not own anything. Because the note had finally reached the point where family theater stops counting as authority. I told him to send every concern in writing and to treat any ownership change language as unverified unless it came through me directly. Then I hung up and wrote the line that mattered most in my notes. Public handoff story moving faster than lender authority. At 8:56, the second call came from our insurance broker, a woman named Denise Parker, and her tone was less careful than irritated, which in my world usually means someone has already spoken much too confidently in a room where liability was listening. "Delilah, I need to know why your sister is online talking like she owns Boone Farm when the active liability rider, seasonal endorsement, and insured operations contact still sit under you," she said. "I can't bind a Newera off a caption." That line almost made me laugh, not because anything was funny, but because it was the cleanest summary of my family I had heard in years. My mother had once again tried to use a gathering to outrun a file. I told Denise the same thing I told the lender. No transfer, no authority change, no approved substitution. Send everything in writing. By 9:10, both emails were in my inbox, and both carried the same institutional tone my family never learns to fear early enough. Clarify now or the systems will do it for you. At 9:17, my mother called. At 9:22, she called again. At 9:29, Wade left a voicemail in that tired, reasonable tone men use when they want coercion to sound like family leadership. "Don't ruin this for the kids," he said. "Your sister has clients looking at the farm this weekend." There it was again. Their public overreach. My cruelty. Their dependence on my note, my rider, my contracts, my emotional problem. I still did not answer, because discipline is one of the only pleasures left when your family is sure you will eventually reorganize your whole day around their panic. At 9:36, the family thread woke up after 5 days of Cassidy's sunset fence photos, little legacy captions, and my mother writing things like, "Finally, the farm is in the right hands." Mom wrote, "Delilah, answer Denise." Cassidy followed with, "This is literally just back-end stuff." Wade added, "We have boarders and kids coming Saturday. Back-end stuff." As if a land note, active insurance, and breeding contracts were decorative wiring instead of the thing that keeps a farm from becoming a foreclosure with horses still on it. I let the messages sit and finished the farrier adjustment because I wanted one more ordinary farm thing done before I stepped fully into the emergency they had manufactured. At 9:51, the outside escalation actor arrived, in the form my family could not sentimentalize away. One of our breeding clients called to confirm whether her mare's fall contract was still secure, because Cassidy had told her the farm was fully transitioning, and she wanted to know if deposit instructions were changing. There it was. Not because they missed me, not because they were sorry, because actual money and actual horses were now standing in a chain my family had tried to turn into branding. I told her no contract authority had changed, and that any revised payment path would come from me in writing if it existed. By 10:14, the lender had sent the formal clarification email. By 10:21, Denise had flagged the rider for review. By 10:33, one of the fall breeding deposits was sitting in limbo because no one with sense wanted to send horse money into a story held together by my silence. At 10:47, My mother finally left the voicemail I had been expecting since Sunday. She did not sound maternal. She sounded inconvenienced that the daughter she had publicly reduced was still sitting inside the machine. "Call me back and fix this quietly," she said. "Cassidy has people coming. The farm cannot look unstable, and you do not get to humiliate us because you are in one of your private moods. Fix this quietly." There it was again. Not "I'm sorry." Not "can we talk?" Not even a decent lie ambitious enough to call itself misunderstanding. Just the command. Convert public disrespect back into private labor. Not because they cared, because the file still did. At 11:02, Cassidy called, and I answered because I wanted her panic in her own voice before my mother translated it into something softer. She did not say hello. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Mom says you're trying to make me look fake." I looked at the land note chain on one screen, the insurance rider on another, and the years I had spent hauling the farm through winter bills, lien scares, and feed emergencies while she practiced looking inevitable in photographs. "You posted owner before you had control," I said. "That is not my work." She inhaled sharply. "So you're really going to freeze the whole farm over this?" There was the inversion in its cleanest form. Their lie becomes my freeze. Their assumption becomes my cruelty. "No," I said. "The systems are doing what they're supposed to do." Then I hung up. By 11:28, the lender had copied counsel. By 11:41, Denise confirmed no rider changes would bind under the new owner story. By 12:07, the breeding client had asked for written reassurance. The tone had changed from clarification to containment. I sent one sentence to Renee, Cassidy, and Wade after that, and only because I wanted the words somewhere they could not revise later. "No transfer has been approved." Then I turned my phone face down and went back to the invoices, because if I was going to be accused of ruining my sister's future, I was at least going to do it after finishing the work that still kept actual horses fed. What would you do when the same people who told you not to ruin this for the kids only started panicking once the lender, the broker, and the breeding clients all learned your name was still the one holding the farm together? The next morning, the problem changed categories. Up to that point, my mother still thought this was about whether I was being generous enough. Cassidy still thought it was about whether I was bitter enough to interrupt her spotlight, and Wade clearly believed the right mix of annoyance and family language could flatten the whole thing into one more technical mess I would absorb before Saturday. But at 8:09 on Thursday morning, the lender forwarded the internal note on the fall operating renewal. Denise sent the insurance exposure summary, and Farm Council marked up the breeding contract chain with language that made my whole body go cold in a way the birthday party had not. The issue was no longer whether my feelings had been hurt beside the pony ring. It was whether my name was being publicly leveraged inside a property, note, and liability structure I had never approved for transfer. That was when the story stopped being about humiliation and became about self-preservation. I called Denise first and asked the only question that mattered. Has anyone represented, directly or indirectly, that I already approved a transition and that the remaining issue is just paperwork? She did not answer immediately, which in my line of work usually means the answer is yes, and the person on the other end is deciding how much honesty the call can survive. Then she said, "Your mother described it as a family handoff already agreed in substance. From our side, the problem is that the policy chain does not say what the public story says." Agreed in substance. There it was. The whole Boone doctrine translated into insurance language. My labor was assumed. My consent was atmospheric. Cassidy's pretty little ownership fantasy was apparently more real than the note, the rider, and the contract chain I had spent 7 years keeping alive. I thanked Denise, hung up, and opened a new folder on my desktop labeled exactly what the situation had become. Boone Farm, unauthorized transfer assumption, full record. Then I built the proof path the way I build anything that needs to survive charm, denial, and selective memory. Source first, document second, meaning third, consequence fourth. The seller financed land note documents first, with my LLC still sitting there in the active obligation chain. Then the insurance rider endorsements and seasonal liability notes, every one still tied to me as the named insured contact. Then the breeding contracts and boarding agreements that actually kept the operation solvent when show season vanity ran out. Then the feed account records, wire confirmations, emergency invoices, and archived messages from the years my mother now likes to call those hard little stretches, as if I had not been the one moving real money when her optimism stopped cashing checks. After that came Renee's texts, and once I stripped away the mother voice, they read less like pleas and more like a manual for how this family had always used me. Save the farm quietly. Do not scare Wade with the note language. Your sister is what clients connect to. After everything we sacrificed, do not punish us with paperwork. Punish. There it was again. Not gratitude, not trust, not partnership. Image. I thought about being 30 and standing in freezing mud with a broken water line while Cassidy was inside taking holiday horse photos for the farm page. I thought about being 32 and wiring emergency feed money after one supplier threatened to hold, while my mother told everyone Cassidy had the instinct that keeps the farm warm. I thought about being 35 and sitting in the lender's office hearing the word default used out loud for the first time, while Wade stared at the floor, and my mother later described the whole afternoon as a stressful conversation Delilah handled. Every time I saved it, they called me family. Every time I protected myself, they called me cold. Around 10:22, council sent the official bridge I needed. If Cassidy continued presenting herself as owner, while the note, liability rider, and breeding contracts remained unresolved under me, then the problem was no longer just internal disrespect. It was active misrepresentation to clients, lenders, and carriers. That moved the whole story out of the realm of sibling injury and into the realm of liability. If a horse got hurt, a client disputed a breeding deposit, or the operating renewal moved under a false transition story, my name would still be sitting underneath the wreckage. That is how women like me get turned into clean hands for dirty family mythology. We are expected to carry the risk quietly until someone prettier wants the title. At 10:47, my mother called from the farm office line, which meant she was done pretending to sound hurt and ready to sound managerial. I answered because by then I wanted her plain voice, not her mother voice. "This has gone far enough," she said. "No hello, no Delilah. The lender is nervous, Denise is overreacting, and clients do not need to see you turn paperwork into punishment." I asked, "Did you tell them I had already agreed?" Silence. Then, "I told them the family had this handled." I wrote that down too, because it was not just dishonest, it was revealing. My mother had never believed my authority was real authority. She believed it was stall work with a file attached, the kind that should dissolve the second the daughter she preferred needed a cleaner story. "No," I told her, "what you want is not support, it's retroactive permission." She went sharp immediately. "After everything we sacrificed, you owe your sister this chance." Oh, there it was again. Debt. The debt I was apparently supposed to keep paying forever because I knew how to keep horses fed, clients calm, and the bank from taking the property while everyone else rehearsed the legacy speech. "What I owe," I said, "is accuracy to every file carrying my name." Then I ended the call and sent one written instruction to the lender, the broker, counsel, and the contract administrator, confirming that no transfer of operational control, note authority, insured contact status, or breeding contract ownership had been approved, and that any contrary representation should be treated as unauthorized. At 11:13, Cassidy texted, "Mom says you're doing this because no one ever saw you as the face of the farm." I read it once and filed it, because by then I could finally name the relationship without flinching. This was not family under stress. It was access dressed up as legacy. Not love, not sacrifice, not home. Just extraction with horses in the background. Cassidy's fall open barn showcase started Saturday at 4 p.m., and I drove through the main gate at 4:18 because timing matters when people are still relaxed enough inside their own lie to keep decorating it. The whole property had been staged for inevitability. White ribbons were tied along the pasture fencing. The indoor arena doors were rolled open to let in the late Kentucky light. Tables with cider, cookies, and little cards about Boone Farm's next chapter sat near the wash racks. The air smelled like leather, sweet feed, manure, hay dust, and expensive horse shampoo. Boarders stood near the cross ties in boots and quilted vests, talking in low voices while pretending this was just another community farm event instead of a public transfer fantasy. One breeding client was by the office porch with a folder under her arm. 2 local trainers stood by the arena rail. The lender's field representative leaned against a post near the tack room, with the polite stillness of a man who had already learned enough to distrust any sentence that started with family understanding. Denise Parker's junior field rep from the insurance side was there too, clipboard in hand, face carefully neutral. Good. The right witnesses were already in the room. Cassidy stood in the center of it all in a cream vest and fitted jeans, one polished boot toe tipped slightly out, smiling the way women smile when they think confidence can outrun paperwork. My mother was beside her, greeting people like she had personally carried the farm through every feed lien, winter pipe break, insurance dispute, and cash flow collapse herself. Wade hovered near the barn aisle with that tired male expression that always said he intended to benefit from the myth without being accountable for building it. When my mother saw me, she crossed the gravel drive quickly, smile still attached but thinner now. "Delilah," she said under her breath, "do not ruin this in front of clients and children." There it was again. Their public lie, my cruelty. Their staged transfer, my timing. "You already did that when you announced an owner before the file existed," I said. Cassidy turned then and raised her voice just enough for the trainers and boarders nearest the arena door to hear. "Look who finally came to support the farm," she said. That was my ignition line, handed to me for free. Support would have been a strange word to use before you started selling a future under a note, rider, and contract chain you do not control, I said. The room did not go silent all at once. It thinned. One boarder lowered her cider cup. The breeding client stopped smiling. The lender's rep looked up from his phone. Denise's rep moved her clipboard against her chest and waited. I set my folder on the office porch rail and opened it without hurry. Seller-financed land note, liability rider endorsements, breeding contracts, lender clarification email, insurance review notice. Then I turned the first pages toward the lender's rep and Denise's rep, instead of toward my family, because professionals are usually the first honest people left in rooms like that. Before anyone here keeps speaking as though Cassidy already owns Boone Farm, I said, the land note, the insurance protection, and the breeding contracts that keep this place solvent are all still in my name, and no transfer has been approved. Cassidy laughed too fast. Oh my God, are you seriously doing this now? You did it first, I said. You just did it with ribbons and cider. That line moved through the crowd because even people who did not understand the full chain understood the shape of the lie. My mother stepped closer and lowered her voice into that sharp whisper she always used when she wanted morality to sound like manners. Be happy for your sister. No, I said. Be accurate. The lender's rep opened his folder then. For clarity, he said, flat enough to cut. There is no executed transfer on the operating renewal path, and the note restructure still resolves through Ms. Boone's entity. Denise's rep followed immediately. And there is no approved insured contact substitution or active endorsement change on file. One of the trainers frowned. The breeding client asked, Then who exactly am I contracted with right now? I answered before my mother could wrap it in family language. You are contracted with me, I said. She is performing ownership on top of it. That was the needle line, and it landed because even Wade stopped pretending to be detached. Cassidy's face changed then. The polished public version dropped away, and the smaller, angrier thing underneath showed through. You are humiliating me over paperwork, she snapped. There was the inversion exactly where it always shows up. A land note becomes paperwork. Liability coverage becomes paperwork. Contract control becomes paperwork. Women like me are always expected to carry the file quietly until the moment we use it, and then suddenly it is just paperwork. No, I said. I'm refusing to let labor be erased into legacy. Then the office printer inside the porch answered for me with a sharp jam alert, and the front screen notification from the lender file still visible through the window. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just one small operational refusal sitting there in plain view. The breeding client looked at the lender's rep, then at me, then stepped back 2 feet like she had finally understood where the risk lived. One boarder whispered, I thought Cassidy already had it. The trainer nearest the rail said, That's not what we were told. My mother went pale, then furious. After everything we sacrificed to keep this farm, you would shame me like this? She hissed. I looked at the paddocks, the children near the pony ring, the horses I had kept fed through bad winters, the clients my mother had used as witnesses to a fantasy, and then back at her. You used this whole farm as a backdrop for a lie, I said. I'm just the first person here willing to name it. That was the end of the performance, even if nobody cried yet, because the room turned procedural. The lender's rep started asking quiet questions about active authority. Denise's rep asked whether Saturday's event language needed to be documented for the file. The breeding client closed her folder. One boarder led her child away from the pony ring. I picked up my papers before the moment could cheapen into tears and family speeches. At the gate, Cassidy called after me, voice cracking now. You're doing this because no one ever saw you as the face of the farm. I turned once. No, I said. I'm doing this because you tried to wear what I kept alive. Then I walked back to my truck, while Boone Farm kept trying to look whole behind me, without clean authority, without stable insurance, and without the daughter they had always counted on to keep the ugly part invisible. When a family uses your silence as staging for a public lie, telling the truth is not revenge. It is the first honest audit anyone has done on the property. The only question left was how expensive the audit was about to become. The open barn showcase did not make me feel vindicated. It did not send me home glowing with justice or standing in my kitchen replaying Cassidy's face with anything that looked like peace. It made me feel wired, sick, and so awake at 2:17 a.m. that I was sitting at my dining table in my work jeans, with one lamp on, a legal pad open, and a mug of coffee gone cold, because some old part of my body still believed stopping the family machine was more dangerous than being fed into it. That is the part people fake when they tell stories like this badly. Public truth does not fix you on contact. It does not send you dancing through the house healed and triumphant. It makes your nervous system accuse you of betrayal, because it was trained to confuse usefulness with love. By Sunday morning, the tactic shift had already started. My mother texted first, saying I had embarrassed her in front of clients, children, boarders, and people who did not need to see private family conflict. Wade followed with the practical version, saying the lender's rep was now tense, Denise's office was making things sound worse than they are, and I had turned one family transition into a public humiliation. Cassidy sent 4 messages in under 2 hours. The first called me jealous. The second said I had always confused control with worth. The third said I would rather wound the whole farm than let her have one clean chance. The fourth was the truest without meaning to be. You could have let me have one day. There it was again. The whole Boone theology in one sentence. Let the visible daughter have the day. Let the practical daughter have the burden. Let me carry the note, the rider, the feed chain, the breeding contracts, the winter repairs, the payroll gaps, and then call me cruel the second I refused to disappear behind it. What unsettled me most was not what they said. It was what some older, trained part of me was still waiting for. Permission. Permission to stop rescuing them. Permission to stop translating my mother's panic into process. Permission to stop calling my usefulness devotion. So instead of answering any of them, I did what my family has always hated most. I took the pattern somewhere honest. My therapist, Dana Mercer, has an office above a physical therapy clinic in Lexington that smells faintly like cedar and printer toner. And by Monday afternoon, I was sitting across from her with my jacket still on, because I knew if I got comfortable first, I would start minimizing. I gave her the facts in order because facts are safer than grief. The party tent, the keys, my mother's line, the lender's call, Denise's warning, the breeding client, the showcase, the public questions, my mother calling me cruel when what she meant was visible. Dana let me finish, then asked the one question that changed the category of the whole story. When did your family first teach you that your competence was the price of staying inside the fence? I stared at the arm of the chair for a long time, because I already knew the answer, and because saying it out loud would make it harder to romanticize later. I was 12 when my mother started leaving feed invoices and border notes for me while Cassidy got dressed for pony classes because people connect to her softness. I was 25 when I paid a hay bill with my own money and got thanked by being told not to mention the amount because it would make Cassidy feel small. I was 33 when I sat across from the insurance adjuster rebuilding the farm rider after the claims dispute, while my mother later told a client Cassidy had the feel for keeping this place alive. Dana did not tell me to forgive them. She asked the better question. How long have you been calling rescue love? That one stayed in my ribs. I went home and wrote the pattern down the way I would write any operational chronology that needed to survive scrutiny. Cassidy gets framed. I get assigned. Renee promises. I stabilize. Wade shrugs. I clean. Public charm on one side, financial labor on the other. Once it was on paper, the guilt lost some of its holiness. It started looking less like conscience and more like conditioning. Then came the meeting. My mother texted Tuesday morning asking for one adult conversation before this becomes permanent, which in my family has always meant, let us rename the damage before the file does it for us. I agreed only because I wanted the truth said in a room where nobody could hide behind children, horses, or legacy language. We met that afternoon in the farm office after hours, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead, old show ribbons fading on the wall, 2 feed catalogs curled on the desk, and the smell of leather, dust, and stale coffee sitting low in the room. My mother started with revision. She said the birthday line had been poorly phrased, not cruel. Cassidy said the showcase had only been meant to create momentum. Wade said no one expected me to make a public issue out of what should have stayed inside the family. Then I laid the file down one item at a time. Land note, insurance rider, breeding contracts, feed records, wire confirmations, payroll transfers. My mother's "save the farm quietly" texts. The room changed the way rooms always change when paper finally outruns tone. My mother snapped first. "You always need documents to feel important." "No," I said. "I need documents when people around me keep trying to inherit what I kept solvent." Wade called me rigid. Cassidy called me vindictive. Then she said the truest thing in the room by accident. "You could have just signed it and let me have this." There it was. Not family, not legacy. Access. Clean enough to stop pretending. Something inside me went still then. Not dramatic, not wounded, just finished. "I am not approving a transfer because Mom promised you a future before she controlled it," I said. "I am not restoring protection so you can keep performing ownership. I am not putting my name back under this farm to protect another public fantasy. And I am done being the daughter you remember only when the system stopped cooperating." My mother called that cruel. Wade said I was making everything final over paperwork. Cassidy started crying in that furious, breathless way favored people do when consequence refuses to reorganize itself around their comfort. I stood up anyway. "No," I said. "I'm just done being your barn labor in human form." Then I took my file and left while they were still trying to turn consequences back into disrespect. The fallout took a little over 5 weeks. And the reason it landed so hard was that it moved through the dull adult places first. Not through screaming, not through one spectacular family implosion under a barn roof. Through lender review language, insurance hesitation, contract uncertainty, and the kind of written clarification that makes charm irrelevant. The agricultural lender did not call the note immediately, which would have been too blunt and almost generous. It did something worse. It slowed into scrutiny. The fall operating renewal stopped feeling routine and started feeling conditional. Denise's office refused to bind any rider adjustment or ownership-facing language, while the named insured and the public story kept contradicting each other. The breeding clients got careful too. Not dramatic, just careful. One asked for an updated contract path before releasing her second deposit. Another postponed a mare shipment until the Boone file stabilizes, which is professional horse language for, "I do not trust your structure right now." Boarders noticed before my family admitted anything. One family paid early and then asked whether the farm's liability protections were still active. Another quietly moved a pony out before October. The local trainer who had smiled through Cassidy's showcase stopped sending referrals. That was the first chain reaction. Not because I yelled, because official people started asking official questions. And once that happens, everyone else starts hearing the floorboards differently. My mother hated that part most. Not that the file had turned against her, that strangers had started asking the exact questions I had been answering alone for 7 years. She tried every register she still had left. First bitter, then punitive, then softer and meaner at the same time, which was always her strongest one. "You are punishing the children who love this farm," she said in one voicemail. "You are punishing your grandfather's memory," she said in another, as if all dead men would naturally prefer sentimental fraud over clean contracts. What she never said was the truth. She had tried to hand Cassidy a farm held together by my note chain, my insurance protection, my breeding contracts, my feed money, and my willingness to stay invisible. The second invisibility ended. So did the fantasy that Cassidy's smile counted as infrastructure. I did not rescue the whole operation, but I did one narrow ethical thing, because boundaries are not the same as collateral cruelty. Through counsel, I authorized a one-time release packet for active boarders and breeding clients whose horses were already committed under existing schedules. So nobody with a live animal on the property got trapped inside my family's ownership fantasy. Nothing broader. No fresh contract approvals. No insurance extension for Cassidy's rebrand. No quiet smoothing of the fall renewal. Just one controlled act separating innocent clients from the mythology that had created the mess. After that, I became unavailable in the only way that matters. Written only. Every lender question through counsel. Every broker question through counsel. Every, can we just talk as family? Ignored, unless it came attached to an actual document and an actual operational issue. About a month after the showcase, the lender requested a formal declaration confirming that no transfer of note authority had been approved and that any contrary public representation had been made without my consent. Denise's office requested matching written confirmation that the insured contact chain remained unchanged, pending any lawful substitution. I reviewed both, corrected one date, tightened one sentence, and signed them the same afternoon. No embellishment, no revenge speech, no daughterly grief hidden inside contract language, just a clean record. That was more devastating than any scene I could have made under that party tent, because once the facts were fixed in the lending file, the insurance chain, and the breeding records, my mother could no longer keep narrating me into the role of bitter older sister instead of the woman who had quietly kept the farm from being sold out from under them. Facts do not need to be loved. They just need somewhere permanent to sit. And once they do, even family stories start sounding cheap. A month later, my mother asked to meet, and I almost said no because by then I understood something I had spent most of my adult life trying not to understand. Closure is not the same thing as restored access, and access is not the same thing as love. Still, I agreed to one final meeting because I wanted the truth said in a room where nobody could soften it back into farm weather. We met in my attorney's conference room at 4:39 on a Thursday, late light flattening against the blinds, stale coffee cooling untouched near the side credenza, and the kind of dry office air that makes every sentence sound more official than the speaker intended. Renee arrived first in one of her soft oatmeal wraps, the kind she wears when she wants to look maternal, burdened, and morally blameless all at once. Wade came in next with the posture of a man who had spent years standing beside the wrong choices and still hoped that counted as neutrality. Cassidy came last, no showcase glow now, no farmhouse keys on display, just a woman who had finally learned that being photographed at the pasture fence is not the same thing as carrying a farm. My mother opened exactly the way I knew she would, not with apology, with pain. "This has been devastating for the family," she said. There it was, the old rearrangement. Blur the damage, make it communal, make it sound like weather so nobody has to name where it began. I let the silence sit there long enough to become useful, then I gave her the cleanest sentence I had. "You handed Cassidy a farm identity built on my land note, my insurance chain, my contracts, and my money, then expected me to keep it alive after telling me I was only fit to muck stalls." My mother cried after that, and maybe the tears were real. They usually are by the time consequence finally reaches people who thought sentiment counted as legal structure. But tears are weather, not proof, and I had finally learned not to confuse visible pain with accountability. Wade tried next because men like him always step in after the first softness fails. "We were trying to give Cassidy a future," he said. "That's all this ever was." I looked at him and felt nothing but accuracy. "No," I said. "That's what you told yourselves. What it actually was another plan built on the assumption that I would absorb the risk and disappear behind it." Cassidy spoke then, and the saddest part was that she still sounded more dazed than ashamed. "Mom said you'd understand," she said. "I thought it was basically done." There it was, the whole family structure in one sentence. She got the promise, I got the process. She got the photos, I got the note payments, the emergency feed bills, the policy calls, and the part nobody wanted to romanticize while it was saving them. "That was always the luxury you were given," I told her. "Other people were assigned the seriousness for you." My mother asked the fantasy question after that, the one families like mine always ask once the useful daughter is still physically present but no longer psychologically available on command. "Is there any way to fix this?" she said. That line might once have worked on me because I used to hear vague hurt and immediately start converting it into labor. A signature, a rider, a softened consequence. A way to keep everyone from having to feel the full shape of what they did. But by then I knew the difference between being needed and being loved, and they are not interchangeable no matter how many mothers cry when the file stops protecting them. "You cannot fix this with emotion," I said. "You can only deal with it through sequence." Then I told them what accountability actually meant. Not tears in a conference room after the public story had already failed. Not calling me family now that the lender, the broker, and the clients had all stopped cooperating. Accountability is changed behavior that costs you something. Accountability is telling the truth before the file forces it. Accountability is admitting out loud that you used one daughter as infrastructure while praising the other for standing on it. My mother flinched at that because it was the first sentence in the room she could not decorate. Wade asked if everything now had to go through lawyers. "Anything involving land, insurance, contracts, money, horses, or emergency rescue does," I said. "For the rest of it, maybe one day, if behavior changes before language does." That was the real answer. Not reconciliation. Not permanent exile. Structure. Distance. Terms. 6 weeks later, I bought a smaller training property in my own name outside Lexington, clean fences, a modest barn, honest books, and no family mythology in the soil. I moved my best clients there under clean contracts, one by one, with direct billing, active coverage, and not one sentimental promise standing where a signature should have been. The first month filled faster than I expected. Not because I got lucky, because for the first time in years, the work I had been doing under somebody else's fantasy was allowed to belong to me. Then my attorney sent the final notice. Clean, narrow, non-negotiable. I would never again finance, insure, guarantee, preserve, or quietly operate any family legacy built on my humiliation. No more off-record rescue. No more just this once. No more maternal urgency used as a solvent for paperwork. I approved the letter without changing a word. That was the deeper revenge. Not that Cassidy lost the owner fantasy. Not that my mother had to watch the showcase shrink under holds, reviews, and quiet client exits. Not even that Wade finally had to learn the difference between charm and solvency. The deeper revenge was this. I was no longer available for the role they had written for me. I was not the stall girl, not the hidden operator, not the daughter who kept the farm breathing while someone else got admired in front of it. They did not miss me as family. They missed the function. Too many families call that legacy because admitting the difference would force them to look at what they built. So tell me honestly, if your family only remembered your value when the note, the insurance, or the contracts were at risk, Would you ever let them back in once you finally put your own name on the gate? And what would have been your breaking point? The birthday humiliation? The frozen renewals? The fake showcase? Or the moment you realized they never really meant family in a way that included your dignity?